Hello and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag, the guide to Italian travel. I'm Nathaniel Mellor.
And I'm Darcy Melton.
Thank you everyone for joining us yet again on a kind of a rainy, cold, chilly day. Today's Monday, and it was I think Thursday that we went from 85-degree days to a balmy 64 and cloudy and rainy. So it's, but it's like one of the things where it's not quite cold enough that you want to put the effort of making a fire or putting on a stove. So you're just sort of sitting here bundled up with sweaters and fingerless gloves and these feet sock things.
Booties.
Booties.
I would call them booties. Yeah, we broke out all of our winter wools and comfy clothes, and you can probably tell that I'm sniffly because of all the dust that was kicked up as we mussed around in our, I don't know,
our
winter.
cedar chest.
Yeah, thank you.
Not
I think
ours.
my brain is foggy too. Wow.
Yeah, well, it is winter. 'Tis the season of teas and hot chocolate, of which there will hopefully be some later. I mean, not maybe for the sniffly people, but for the non-sniffly people.
I could have tea. Nice,
Okay.
A nice hot cuppa.
And as always, thank you all so much for listening to us ramble on about Italy. We do deeply appreciate it. We hope you learned something from it. We hope you enjoy it. If you enjoy it, please leave us a review. It helps us tremendously. I sound sarcastic when I'm saying that, but I'm 100% honest. It really does help us. It helps us in the algorithm and helps other people find us. And makes us happy to see. So please leave a review. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can find us on Instagram at onlyabagpodcast. You can also email us at onlyabagpodcast@gmail.com. Plus, you can go to the website, onlyabag.com, and read some articles, check out some information. It's one of those things, again, I keep mentioning this and probably will for the next 6 to 8 months, that it is a slow growing website. It's just, I write when I can, and Darcy writes when she can. So it'll get there. By this time next year, it'll be a phenomenal website. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much.
So today we're going to talk about, I guess a couple things, a couple interrelated things.
Yes, I think 3.
3. Okay. And as the title would suggest, again, the title we've not yet come up with a name for at this moment. Essentially, we're talking about entry visa requirements are changing. We're talking about tourist taxes. We're talking about a little bit of over-tourism. There's kind of a big branching overall subject of, I think Italy is experiencing what a lot of Europe is, and it's too many tourists in Italy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it's a fair way to put it.
I would say so. I feel like that's been I'm not a part of the tourism board, but I feel like that's been an issue that's been happening for a long time. And it feels like they're reaching a point where they're starting to kind of freak out about having too many tourists finally. And in that freaking out, they're instituting some new requirements, I guess, in order to sort of, I think all of the EU doesn't want to curb their tourism, but they do want to manage the damage that tourism does on cities and towns and protect the locals.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's the intent. I don't know if that's always what's going to happen, but I think that's the intent.
And I think some of this too is if you've come to Italy multiple times over the last 7 years or so, you will have probably noticed a shift from 2019 to 2022, 2023, that COVID period. And that was, I think, a big changing period as well for Italy specifically. I mean, for a lot of Europe. But I know that Italy has always had a very laissez-faire attitude when it comes to the maximum capacity or how many tickets you can sell. And I know even you and I have had the experience of pre-COVID, there were not very many the line to get into the Pantheon, for instance, wasn't as long as it is post-COVID. And a lot of that had to do with during COVID and then post-COVID, they were adhering to this sort of only, 400 people in at one time kind of thing, or not that many, but, I think 200 people in at a time, something like that. During COVID, it was more strict. After COVID, it was less strict. But essentially before COVID, apparently, something I'd learned recently is a lot of Vatican, Pantheon, Colosseum, a lot of these places that now have, the Colosseum, as we found out, this year. I think we went for the first time, despite having lived in Italy for almost a decade, or on and off almost a decade. But we went for free Sunday because, we can't beat a good deal. And no, it's interesting that you get a ticket just like any other time, but it happens to be free and it's for a specific time slot. So it's a way of kind of keeping people from all slamming in there at 7 a.m. And a lot of that is holdover basically from COVID. And it looks like, I think for a minute there, it was going to go either way. Like it might go back to just, if you want to go visit the Vatican at just random time, go to visit the Vatican. There's no problem. And when I say Vatican, I mean the museums. But now it seems like they are adhering to a more of a strict, like, no, we have a capacity in mind. It's 1,200 people. Once that's filled, that's filled. And I think the reason I mentioned Vatican museums is I think we found last entry is like 6:30, but like it closes at like 8 or something like that, 8:30. And so it's all a way to kind of keep people from, again, overburdening an already burdened system. But that's not exactly what we're going to talk about today. Instead, we're going to talk about what Italy is doing to sort of combat these problems.
Yeah. And so they say combat terrorism.
Yes. Which feels like a very broad terminology, I think.
Yeah. It's all it's for security purposes, everything that they're doing. So one of the big changes is Italy and all of the Schengen countries are changing their entry requirements for basically everyone, which sounds terrifying, but it's pretty simple and you're going to be fine.
And Darcy, what is the Schengen zone? Just for our listeners who maybe are not aware of what the Schengen zone is.
Okay, so the Schengen zone is commonly confused, I think, with the EU. It's not the same, although I think almost every EU country is a part of the Schengen zone.
Yeah, something like there's a few that aren't, but yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of, I learned this just today because I think of it as a lot of countries. It's roughly, I think, 29 countries, and Cyprus is like almost,
Yeah.
because they will become a part of the Schengen zone in the future. But it's a lot of countries throughout Europe, essentially, and it was created so that not every country has a physical border crossing, like on the ground whenever you're going from one country to another. They have an agreement that people can move within those countries without having to do border checks.
And so essentially the days of well, actually not the days of, it's still in days like Southeast Asia. I know it's really popular to do what's called border runs, where you go, I think if you're in Indonesia, you just run to Vietnam or Thailand or somewhere else you want to visit, and then go, just literally step out of the country, go back in, get your border stamped, and you're good for another few months or another year, depending which country you're at. That used to be possible in some, not all European countries. I think Portugal and France were two countries that you could, in practice, leave, go to Spain for lunch, and then as you go back into France, they stamp you again, and you're good for another, whatever it is, 90 days. That all changed with the Schengen Zone Agreement that gave you 90 days every 180 days, and it's sort of a rolling thing. So essentially, it just looks back, if you come to Europe, it looks back at the last 180 days and to check, have you been in Italy for more than 90 of those days? And then I think even in relation to it, it's not actually 90. It is, but they're very clear. If you only have 1 week left on your Schengen Zone visa, you're probably not coming in unless you have a return ticket and you have a reason to be there. You're an artist or you're a musician or something like that, where you're coming for a show. Maybe you're somebody in business and you're coming for a meeting. Then they'll let you in. But if you're a tourist and you're like, oh, I have a week left, I'm going to go spend 5 days in Florence, they're probably not going to let you in because they, run the risk of you not leaving in time. And yeah, as I just wanted to clarify, as you mentioned, it's basically an easy way to think of it as all of Europe mainland, not the British Isles. So none of basically England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, Northern Ireland are not part of the Schengen Zone, but Iceland is part of the Schengen Zone. And then I think too, I think Slovenia, Slovakia, a few of those other, the sort of Northern European, Eastern European countries are part of the Schengen Zone. So it gets a little and I only mention that specifically because I think some people think oh, I'll go there to reset my visa. And I think you have to go, I think Czech Republic is not part of the Schengen Zone. I think Hungary, I'm thinking people go to Budapest to reset, people go to Prague, people go to Sofia, I guess in Romania. So I think there's
Well, actually, I think Romania, just this year, there are two countries, Romania and one other one, that became members of the Schengen area.
well, never mind then.
I know, it's expanding.
This is interesting because again, you and I started traveling in 2014, more or less, and obviously things were slightly different and not that much different, but it's essentially it's strange because like Italy's on that same 90-day thing as like Poland and as Slovenia and as Iceland. So it is a bit of a bummer if you're like, I want to go see all of Europe. I want to go backpack through Europe for a year. You really can't. You can backpack through Europe for 90 days and then go to Eastern Europe for 90 days and then go back to Europe for 90 days.
Or to the UK.
And that one's even harder. I mean, we can talk about it. I mean, never have to talk about that because it's not a UK podcast. But I think it's lessening now. But I think UK does have a minimum like amount of money in your bank to enter.
Yeah,
like you can't just enter as like a frugal backpacker. Like they need to know you're not going to be picking up some sly work or something. So yes, that's the Schengen zone for anybody not aware.
One thing that I don't want to speak on too much because I not read up on it well enough, but I know like Liechtenstein and Switzerland, I think, are like half in and half out, like commitment wise to the Schengen area. So they are involved in what we're going to talk about, the new entry requirements. But they don't, like Switzerland doesn't get to vote on Schengen things.
Interesting. Because they're not EU, neither is Liechtenstein.
Right, but they do benefit from the open-ish border policy of the Schengen area. Something like that.
What about Norway? Did you find anything about Norway?
Yeah, Norway's another weird one, but again, I don't remember what it is. Like there's I think there's two versions of being half in and half out.
Okay.
Like there's I think Ireland and Switzerland have opted out of like getting votes, but they are part of the, like I said, the sort of open border thing. Liechtenstein, I think, is a different version. We should probably do maybe a little short info episode on
what
that.
Is the Schengen zone?
Yeah, because even like I'm talking right now, and I kind of know, but I'm not an expert.
Well, one of the reasons I mentioned that is because I think for when I was first traveling, like 2013, 2014, when we were going together, like one of the sort of folk tale pieces of advice was that because Norway was not in the EU, you could go and reset your visa there. And everyone's like, no, they're firmly in the Schengen zone. That still counts. So is Switzerland, so is Liechtenstein, so is Vatican City, Monaco, and San Marino, 3 microstates. I think there's at least 4 or 5 microstates that are in the Schengen zone. Those are just 3 of the ones I know off the top of my head.
And those are kind of in there by default because they can't manage their own borders and they can't, like they just don't have enough people power. So they're just de facto in. Because
I think like Vatican, as dear listener, you will notice if you go to Rome, that it doesn't, I think it's like, I always thought the Vatican started inside, like the gates. Like you can see that the guards, and you have to go physically in. I'm like, I think that's just where people work and live. I think like the actual Vatican area is outside with there's like some churches and there's some, because there's consulates outside, there's a pharmacy outside, and that's technically the Vatican pharmacy. It's the Vatican church. Like I think there's like, I mentioned the pharmacy specifically because as we've mentioned in previous episodes, if you are looking for pharmaceuticals in Rome specifically,
you say that like they're illicit drugs.
I know.
It's just normal pharmacy drugs.
Well, yeah, I guess if you're looking, well, I don't say if you're looking for drugs, go to the Vatican. If you're looking for pharmacy drugs, go to the Vatican, because they don't pay the same tax rate that Italy does on drugs. So it's I don't think they pay VAT or they pay a lower VAT or something like that. So it's a lot, VAT being the value added tax of 22%. So I think it's a lot cheaper for like whatever you need as far as, again, pharmaceutical drugs.
Medication.
Yeah, there we go. I could have just said medication.
I know, I couldn't think of that word until just now.
Oh, thank you. Good save. So what is the new visa requirement, or what is this new visa system?
Okay, so it's called ETIAS, ETIAS, because Italians...
Such a flair.
Italians say every, was it an acronym? Is that what things are? They say that, is that what, whenever you abbreviate something? Is it
it's an initialism. If you just like FBI is an initialism, but PETA is an acronym.
Okay. Well,
so if you pronounce it as a thing, well, I think this would be an acronym because my guess is people say ETIAS. They don't say ETIAS, I think.
Especially Italians. Because my point is that they always try to put a word to whatever it is.
Oh, for sure.
Like SUV.
Instead of SUV?
SUV.
Yeah.
My favorite.
Cha instead of CIA. That's what I like. Kujiba and Cha. And I'm like, Oh, KGB and CIA. Okay, that's what's up. But
It
no,
makes the KGB sound so less scary. Yeah,
KGB.
he's an ex-KGB
Yeah,
agent.
right. He's a cha. Oh, is he really?
Okay, so ETIAS, ETIAS stands for European Travel Information and Authorization System.
Man, that's a killing. I love that.
I know.
They workshopped that one for a while.
So basically, this is just it's a new system for managing people coming through the Schengen area.
Okay.
So it's for everybody who is a visa exempt national, which is Americans and people from 60 different countries all over the world. So it's going to be affecting approximately 1.4 billion people. So you're not alone.
Yeah, no kidding. But it's essentially, just for our listeners' sake, it sounds like it's U.S., Canada, Mexico. Do you know if it's England as well, or do they have their own? Will they have their own system?
That's a great question.
Because I think ever since they left the EU, they have to abide by these new restrictions as well.
Well, I don't know that they're visa exempt though anymore.
That's what I'm saying. I think they might be the same. They might have a similar thing that Americans, Canadians, and everybody else has, is like a visa stamped at the border, which is
do they? Okay.
What we have right now, technically.
Okay. I assumed that they had an extra step now that they're not a part of the EU, that they had to apply for a visa or something.
Could be. I don't know. That's a good question. I'd be curious. And I think we have some going by our Spotify statistics, we have some listeners from the British Isles who know more than us. So if you do know, let us know. We'd love to.
Yeah, please do.
We'd love to know if you have to apply for something special, because I think, I'm curious, basically the train between London and Paris. I'm curious if now, I assumed it used to be something where you could kind of just scan your ticket and get on. Mm-hmm. And now I'm wondering, I'm like, oh, is there like sort of border controls now at that train station, like on either end of the stops? Or is it like somebody comes through the train to check passports? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. And later we're going to talk about, what is it called? The EES?
Yes.
Which is basically the electronic, like they're going to take your photo and take copies of your documents, for coming in and out of EU countries, right?
And Schengen mostly.
And Schengen. Okay. So we're going to talk about that later, but I think that would kind of answer your question as to, like, if you're coming through the tunnel to France from the UK, they will at least do the EES, taking your photo and your
fingerprints and all that kind of stuff.
And your document information and stuff.
Okay, good to know. So basically, it's essentially for Australian, American, Canadian, and possibly British listeners, or Scottish, Welsh, and Irish, and Northern Irish listeners. I think, and I guess, because I know it does for Mexico, I think, but it's kind of, you said 60 countries, and it's kind of an interesting, like...
Oh, it's a lot.
Yeah, well, it's like an oddball collection of countries in the sense of it's like some Asian countries, some South American, Central American countries. Mm-hmm. I think it's probably, I imagine it includes some Eastern European countries as well. Mm-hmm. Because unless they have their own, again, because some of these, basically, this get weird. It gets weird because I think sometimes a country has its own arrangement with Europe that isn't like necessarily replicated anywhere else. So it's like, oh, I don't know, it might be something weird like Moldova has its own,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they do, but like it's something weird that, sometimes they'll have these different...
Their own arrangement.
Their own, yeah, right, like holdover arrangement or something. So that's good to know. Okay.
Yeah, but so basically there are 60 countries, some of which you just listed. And like Americans, when you come in, they stamp your passport. And that is your visa exemption. I always called that the visa, but that's not what it is. That's like, your visa exempt, here's your stamp. You're good to go. Our countries have an agreement with each other, and you're covered. Other people who are not in those 60 countries have to apply for a visa to visit the EU and Schengen areas. Much like people have to get a visa to come to the US.
Yeah.
So these 60 countries are visa exempt, which just means that up until, this takes effect, you get a stamp on your passport, you're good to go. But now it's just a small step further. So what you're going to have to do is apply for the ETIS.
ETIAS.
Yeah, ETIAS. You just have to fill out the ETIAS application online or through their app. You're going to have to pay €7 for the processing fee, I guess.
It's like a non-refundable application fee.
Yeah, thank you. But if you're under 18, you're exempt from paying that fee. You still have to do the ETIAS application, but you're exempt from the fee. And if you're over 70, you're exempt from the fee, but you still have to do the application. So it's valid for 3 years or until your passport expires. If you renew your passport, you have to do a new application for ETIAS. And it's going to start in early 2025 is when all of this is going to be taking place. I imagine there's going to be some short like grace period for figuring out all of this and making sure people know that this is what they need to be doing. But yeah, early 2025.
Because it's been in the works though for a while.
Since January 2021 is when it was supposed to first roll out, right?
I think so, because it's like, and again, dear listeners, if you are somebody who is like up to date with travel stuff, you'll have noticed that a lot of the articles talking about this are actually articles from like 2019, 2018, 2020, because this was supposed to go into effect almost 4 years ago.
Right.
And I guess it was just delayed.
Yeah, I think it was delayed partly because of the EES system for like electronically identifying people. I think the way they're doing it kind of goes hand in hand, and there were just delays rolling out that system. Also, it's Europe, and there's a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork,
to be
and
fair,
things
also,
are slow.
I imagine like when they set that date, they didn't expect COVID, so I think it was probably like all of a sudden it wasn't that important to get that done. If there was like, I don't know how much like processing power went towards getting this in order, and they're like, well, who knows when the border's going to open up, let's actually focus on something else first. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So whenever you fill out your application, like I said, you can do it online or through their app. It should ideally only take a few minutes. It should be quite instant. You fill out your information, you give them like your first name, last name, passport number, all that good stuff, all your regular travel info, and you'll get a response back. It can take 2 weeks if they need further information, if they're like unclear about, I don't know, who you are or some of the information you gave them. But the longest amount of time it can take is 30 days if they're like, oh, shoot, we need to do an interview with this person. I don't know what instance that would be, but
I imagine though it's similar, just for what it's worth, because there's a similar it's like ESTA, ESTA, which is America's version for basically, it's like, I think similar amount of countries, 40, 50 countries, that essentially you can apply for a visa exemption to come to the States. And I think that, again, I don't know, again, this is one of the ones, I don't know if Canada has their own version, like, because I don't know, I did not find that Canada was part of this. It seemed mostly like Europe, Asia, Africa. So I'm curious, and basically with theirs, I think theirs is like, America's charge is 25 for theirs instead of 7. So it's a little bit more expensive. And it's only good for 2 years instead of 3 years. But I thought the interesting, because one of their stipulations was you could not have entered basically like Iran, Iraq, Sudan, Cuba, like, I mean, it's something like 30, Yemen, like 30 different countries.
And Cuba. Did you say that one?
Yeah, Cuba.
Okay, that's one I find interesting.
Well, yeah, and like in the last, I mean, they gave a date, I think like since 2011, 2012, basically, which is only interesting because obviously, or not obviously, somewhat not obviously, is that like Italy, for example, has diplomatic relations with Cuba, and a lot of Italians will go to Cuba for vacation. You know, it's got like clear beaches, and it's got, you know, mojitos. I have no idea anything. I have no concept of what Cuba looks like. I apologize.
They definitely have cigars.
They have cigars. I've been told.
Which is like a fun vacation thing,
yeah,
probably.
And apparently old cars, but also some just new European cars, and like Russian hotels. I have no idea what goes on in Cuba. I just want to be super clear. If you're from listening to this, you're like, this guy's an idiot. Yes, about Cuba, 100%. So that being said, though, is a lot of Italians will go to Cuba because it's cheap, affordable, sunny.
Great beaches.
And they, you know, a lot of people speak Spanish, and I guess Italians sort of stumble through Italian and they can figure it out. I don't know.
A lot of Italians, though, speak Spanish because they're, I was going to say ancestors, they're relatives. There are a lot of Italians in South America. So I think that there's a lot of Italians do speak Spanish.
That is a very good point. Yeah, no. So I think it's like, Cuba becomes it's like, I'm thinking basically Italians go to like Croatia, Italians go to like North Macedonia, things like that. It's funny, like I think a lot of Americans go to cheaper countries, quote unquote, with nice beaches. And because Italy tends to be one of those cheaper countries, Italians also do the same thing. They go to cheaper countries with nice beaches, which is like Croatia or Cuba in some cases. So it's interesting, just that's a specifically interesting note because it means like if you're an Italian and went to Cuba in like 2014 for vacation, you can't get this visa exempt stamp. You have to go through a tourist application visa process with America just to visit, which seems just wild.
To me, it seems like if you're like a little kid on the playground, the U.S. is that kid who's like, well, I don't like them anymore. So if you're going to be friends with them, there's going to be like extra penalties.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you're not. You went to Cuba in 2012 and now you can't come into America in like 2024. It seems wild. So all that being said is I imagine this interview process is possibly something similar, like if it's certain flagged countries that you visited, or if
I see what you're saying.
yeah,
That's a good point.
There might be something like that where it's, or if it's like, I mean, there's that classic sort of thing. You share the name with somebody who's on a no-fly list or something like that. They probably have to interview you if it's like, well, we're just kind of making sure that you are who you say you are, kind of thing. But you're right. Everything I read as well was basically within minutes to like 96 hours at the latest for normal application processing times. However, again, as you mentioned earlier, this is Europe, and they haven't really tested the system like to the 1.2 billion people that want to come to Europe. I mean, they don't all want to come to Europe, obviously.
No, but it's going to be affecting, like you said, over a billion people. So there's going to be taxing on the system.
Yeah.
Not financial taxing. It's just going to be, the system's going to be working hard to manage all of this information. So I imagine there's going to be some bugs in the system whenever it first gets rolled out.
Yeah.
But that's all to say that, if you're planning on coming to Italy or anywhere in this Schengen area in 2025, it's like we said, it's going to be rolled out in early 2025. So just keep your eye on it, Google it occasionally so that you can do your application ahead of your trip. If you have forgotten to do it, you're, in is summer 2025, you're in line at passport control and you're like, wow, I forgot to do this thing. You can get the app and try to apply.
Yeah.
It might be fine. It can happen in as little as a few minutes. But if you're planning ahead, do try to stay up on this and we'll keep you updated as much as we can. And go ahead and apply before you come. Their website says apply before you book hotels and book flights. But obviously right now you can't do that because we don't know exactly when it's going to take effect.
It's also, though, if I may just throw in, it's not a bad idea because this isn't contingent on an actual visit to Europe. In the sense of like some visas, I know when I went to China, I had to get a visa for China. And one of the things I needed just to get the visa was a letter of invitation. And sometimes that's from a hotel. Sometimes it's from somebody there that who can invite you, quote unquote. And I couldn't get the visa without that. But this is not contingent on the same thing. So if you're just like, I'm going to go to Italy at some point, or I'm going to go to Europe at some point in the next year or two, then, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and get, because it is good for 3 years. It's, it's kind of like I don't know, definitely don't wait till the last minute, but also you can just kind of consider it like a trip planning thing. Just like, like anything else you might get, like whether it's a travel credit card you want to apply for, whether it's, I know sometimes you might need shots if you're going to like Southeast Asia, or vaccines. So it's kind of like, if you put it in that sort of perspective, I think it's a lot easier to be like, oh yeah, I'll just have to go and apply for that thing.
It's just an extra annoying step and it costs €7, which is, an additional cost to your trip, but it's not, I think it can sound a lot scarier than it really is.
For sure.
And it's you should be totally fine. I think most people are not going to be, flagged or, it's not going to take more than a few minutes for most people. If you are denied if your application is denied, you can appeal. So
That's
it's
good.
Yeah. It's not an end all be all.
It's your trip, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of ease, it's not like an extra document that you're going to have to actually bring with you. Whenever I was reading up on this, because I'm the kind of person that I always have my passport and my permesso di soggiorno, which is like my residency visa, in hand just in case they need it, and my plane tickets. I'm like so nervous at border control.
Yeah, no kidding.
So I'm reading all this information thinking, oh my gosh, this is another piece of paper that I have to keep track of. It's not. It's linked to your passport number. So the website is very adamant that you have to make sure that your passport information, all of your name and everything is 100% accurate on your application, because all they do is scan your passport like normal, and it's just wrapped up in the whole thing. So you don't have to carry an extra identifying information. It's just linked to your passport.
And in this vein of information, so it sounds like they just take basic information, but does this EES thing take more?
Yeah, okay, so that pretty much wraps up ETIAS, ETIAS, which is the new application thingy you're going to have to do. But there's also, like you just said, the EES, which is, let me check my notes for what it actually means.
Entry-exit system, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. Well done.
You're welcome. Just like the name.
EAS.
Easy.
I wonder how S is maybe how Italians say it. I don't know.
S. I like that.
S. Anyways, so EES. So that is the essentially like the new border control system, and it takes. A lot of you have probably done what this is. Like they've been rolling out these systems. It's whenever you come through the border control, you scan your passport. You scan. Sometimes already you're scanning your fingerprints, and then it does that digital face recognition photo thing. And then you move through the little gate, So that's what this is. It takes your biodata, which is fingerprints and a photo of you. And then they do computer things to analyze, like the AI compares your photo to previous photos, and your passport photo, I guess. And then they take your name and your passport information.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. It's to secure the borders, essentially, which sounds horrible, but I think it's keeping track of people is what it's doing.
Well, it's interesting too. I don't know if you're going to get into this. If I'm jumping the something here. What is it?
Jumping the gun?
Jumping the gun. Thank you. I'm like, I'm jumping, right? No, it is the. I know that for a while, for like years, I think one of the big things that pops up on like travel forums and even travel subreddits on Reddit. Or one big question is basically, what does the passport machine do at the airport? Like when they scan your passport, like for border control, for passport control, what is it actually checking? Is it checking entry and exit dates? Is it checking names and faces and this and that? And it seems like border control cannot actually talk about, like they're all under sort of NDAs, or we'll sue you if you talk about it. But it seems like what people have gathered is that all it does is checks to see if you are on a no-fly list or to see if you've been flagged for some reason. It does not check your entry and exit date. And the reason I mentioned that is because an important sort of stipulation is because I know that Italy specifically is often sort of touted as especially like Naples Airport as one of the locations you can go to if you're like, oh my God, I didn't realize I overstayed my visa, or I knew I overstayed my visa, but I was trying to be sneaky about it. And I know even in Spain, there's a few options. Like there's a few people like, oh, you can go to this airport in Spain or this airport in Portugal. Cause it's like the idea was like, you can always go to a southern, country and you'll be like, Greece, and you're like, I'll be fine. Just fly out of Greece, fly out of Naples.
And you're talking about like the actual people border control, right?
Yes.
Not the machines. Okay.
Yes. And that was the thing. Cause it's like, they're like, as long as that machine isn't scanning your day in and day out, it's just the border control people looking for the last stamp in your passport, you're good. And to be fair, in the Naples airport, I'm not entirely sure if they've even like looked at a passport before. Like they are very lackadaisical with it. They have no care in the world whether you came in or didn't come in or who you are. They don't look at you long enough to like stop the conversation they're having, which is really kind of lovely. I mean, it very much feels like, we're all in this together in the sense that you're ignoring me and just getting on a flight. But I know I mentioned that because what I read about the EES is that they will start tracking your when you came into the country and when you left the country, which essentially it sounds like it's going to be impossible now, functionally impossible to overstay a tourist visa.
Right. I mean, legally, yes. Because you can overstay, but then they basically just won't let you back in the country, right?
Yeah. They kick you out.
Yeah. And basically, like they're tracking when you enter and when you exit. So if you exit and you've overstayed, there will be some form of reciprocation? No,
reciprocity.
Yeah.
But I think because usually it depends how long you've overstayed and why, but sometimes it's just like banned for a year from entering. Sometimes it's more than that. Every once in a while, like you'll hear stories like somebody was exiled from Europe because it's like, they overstayed by like 4 years and it was on a tourist visa and they were working. But no, I only say that too because that used to be such a big, to be clear, we do not advocate for overstaying your visa.
No.
And I know that it happens. People do kind of get in a situation where either, for whatever reason they need to, because there's all sorts of like, and the reason I mentioned this though is specifically because one of the, again, from the sort of not so morally upstanding parts of the internet, one of the tricks was to lose your passport while you were abroad, and the stamps would all be gone. So when the consulate basically asks you, when did you enter in the country? And if you just kind of, if you basically lied, or, if you falsified your flight data or something like that and gave them, fake information, they would stamp what you said your entry date was, not what your entry date actually is. But because a renewed passport has the same passport number and the same information, I'm curious too, because obviously it doesn't it sounds like this would make your ETIAS visa null. But I'm wondering if EES would still be tracking, this passport numbers actually came into this country 6 months ago, and we'd have no record of it leaving. So it kind of makes sense, though, why ETIAS wanted EES rolled out so many acronyms or initialisms before basically starting, because it seems like a way to kind of really clamp down on just as much as, what do they call it, like anti-terrorism. It seems like just as much anti-terrorism as it is like backpackers overstaying their 3-month visa. So I thought that was an interesting way of clarifying what they're actually going to be doing, because I think prior to this there was really no clarification on what the passport scanners did.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't think there was, and I my experience of doing the passport scanning and the facial recognition and the fingerprinting, I'm sure somebody knew what it was doing, but I think a lot of the people, like the airport workers too, it's like it wasn't that clear what it was doing.
No, for sure.
And it also often malfunctioned. And there's all these things that are wrapped up in new technology that I think people are just like, I don't know, they just wanted us to do it. Can you please just help me out and just do it?
There was the flight though, not to go off topic too much really quickly, but I know the Dublin airport converted part of it. Part of the airport is now you have to literally go through TSA, American TSA, to get into this section of the airport. But when you land in America, you don't have to go through passport control, border control, security, anything like that. So I think we were going on some sort of flight from Italy to Dublin to Philadelphia or something like that, and then down to Savannah. And normally when we go from Europe to America, we have to leave security and go back through security, mainly because American security tends to be tighter than European security, as far as Europe doesn't care where your laptop is or anything like that. They're like, I don't know, keep your shoes on and your belt. What are you doing? This is weird. So every time we fly to the States, we always have to go through a second, inter-country security. But flying from Dublin, we didn't, and it was because we already went through TSA. And I thought that was interesting. But their facial recognition scanners and all that stuff was down getting on the plane, and they were just like, you know what, we're just going to give up.
But do you remember, I think it was the same time we were going through Dublin, correct me if I'm wrong, but they had just installed the machines on that day, and there were a bunch of airport officials there, as if this was some ribbon cutting ceremony, and all of us getting on the flight had no idea. It's literally they brought in the machines, people were using screwdrivers to install them, and then they were like, okay, go on through, and a bunch of us were like, no, they didn't work. And so the airport personnel just kind of awkwardly clapped and then left.
Yeah. Then that's what I think it was, because but they had, I remember one guy in that little lanyard, and I just was trying to make them work. And the flight attendants were like, we're sorry, we're going to try to get you guys boarded. We're not flight attendants, the gate agents. We're going to try to get you, boarded as soon as possible. We're going to try to, and finally,
we were all
just
so
forget
confused about what was going on.
We're like, just take a picture of us, get a Polaroid. Just let's get this, process going. So that was a little ridiculous, I will say. So I didn't know if that, but it sounds like that was an early version of EES is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I think they've been, because they can't, there are a lot of airports and a lot of border controls in these airports, and also in, I imagine, train stations and seaports, all of these things are going to have this system. To enter and exit, you have to go through this system, not within countries. I'll get into that in a second, but, on the exterior border of the EU is where these are happening. So the point is that they can't all install them all in one day. So I think it's been rolling out, and then this whole system will become one, I guess.
Makes sense.
I think it's November 2024. So coming up in a few months is when it's supposed to kick off, I guess.
And I'm also wondering too, is if how many or which or if airplane routes will change, because I'm thinking in BVA, Bougeot, I guess, Boujoli, I can't remember exactly. I only remember the airport code in north of Paris. There's the Paris. Bouveau. Okay. I'm thinking of wine maybe. Bouveau. But north of Paris, there's that basically airport, quote unquote, and it's like two trailers stuck together and a tarmac. But it does fly you out of the Schengen zone. And I think Ohrid's airport in North Macedonia flies you into the Schengen zone. And it's, again, a low squat brick building with a trailer attached to it. And I think the Salerno airport just opened up, which is only interesting because it is now the closest airport to the Amalfi Coast. That one, I'm not entirely sure if they do any outside of Europe
like
flights.
International.
Yeah. But the reason I mentioned that is I'm wondering with this EES system, if they're like, yeah, we're not paying, because I imagine these systems are like, 50 grand, 80 grand a piece kind of thing. And I'm like, they're not installing these at Bouvo's airport. We're not installing this in Ohrid's. We're going to just cut the flights that go.
Maybe.
Because, that's the whole point of Ryanair and EasyJet and Wizz Air using these tiny airports is to kind of get around the fees associated with using larger major airports. So I'm wondering if there's like a fee. Basically, there might be like a, because I could not find when I looked this up who was paying for it. Like, it seems like Europe is paying for it, like to install it. And I'm curious, like, if also Europe is paying to kind of keep them, maintained. Exactly. So I'm kind of curious, like, because if it is, I'm like, you need, is it just like if they go down for the day, does it mean like all of a sudden all flights are canceled somewhere because our security system went down? And that's what I'm curious, like.
I would imagine just from what experiences I've had when the systems do go down, it's that they revert back to like analog systems. So the border control agents are still going to be there.
Right.
And I don't know exactly what their job titles are, but whenever I came through Rome this last time, I think entering Rome, coming back from the US, entering Rome, I had to they do your passport scan, facial scan.
Yeah.
The machines were freaking out.
Yeah.
And it was a nightmare. And it was just regular airport employees. Again, I don't know what their job titles were. I don't know if they're a part of the security system. They were just trying to figure out what was going wrong and move people through the machines.
It's kind of like when the CrowdStrike thing happened
a
couple months ago, and all of a sudden, like, basically, and gate agents were physically filling out these boarding passes. They're like, we just got to get people moving. Like, we can't just not have people moving.
So I think at least for a while, it's gonna, if something goes wrong with the technology, it's gonna revert back to the original human system.
Yeah, and that makes sense. That's why I'm curious, just because it is it seems like one of those things where it's like you're putting a lot of expectations on like a software update not crashing this, or like, a power outage or something like that just not happening. So it's interesting. I'm curious how that works.
And speaking of that sort of analog thing, I think for me personally, the saddest part of this is that they're going to do away with passport stamps.
That is a shame.
I know. It already stinks that I think like I wasn't traveling in like the cool heyday of getting like weird, interesting stamps all over your passport and going, I appreciate that the EU is the EU, so you can move through countries, but I think they're old, really cool passports with crazy stamps that are really fun to like show your kids and your grandkids. And now they all have basically the same stamp. They're mostly stamping the same page, to be honest.
Yeah, they kind of restamp over the same page.
And it all looks pretty generic. But with this system, they're not going to be stamping passports anymore, in theory, so they say.
Well, that kind of sucks too. I mean, it's funny because I know that one of the people ask again, dear listeners, if you're from the States, you might know this. If you're not from the States, you also might know this, but it'd be weirder if you knew this. When you drive into Florida, you can stop at the welcome to Florida Visitor Center and get a free cup of orange juice or grapefruit juice. And it's just, a weird, cute thing. It's not great. It's not even very good. But if you're from Florida, I apologize. But let's be honest, that is some.
It used to be better.
Concentrate.
It used to be like fresh squeezed.
They had oranges back there, and now
now it's not. It's still fun though.
Oh, it's still, it totally should do it. But I was thinking, like, that's the thing that people want, like, if you're driving from like Switzerland to Italy or Italy to France, like I think people still like if there's a way to like just pull off somewhere and still have somebody to stamp the book, just to like
absolutely,
just so
it doesn't have to be official.
No,
I just want a fun stamp saying that I visited that country.
Because I think Japan, weirdly, we don't know anything about Japan, or I don't know that you might know about Japan, but I think they have a they have some, because I thought like you had to be official to stamp the passport book. Literally anybody you could stamp in your passport book if you wanted to. It's just if you don't have a free page, then you can't get into a country. But like you could just apparently just doodle in the passport. Apparently. And so I know that Japan, one of the things they have are these stamps for like if you've gone to Mount Fuji, you can get a passport stamp. And if you've gone to certain things, you can get a passport stamp and your actual passport. And because I assumed, again, like I thought somewhere on my passport was like, property of the federal government kind of thing. And maybe it does say that. It's really, I always thought it was really strict. Like
There's definitely like a rules page in
right?
there somewhere.
Yeah, I thought it was not like no just stamping wildly, but apparently you can have certain stamps in your passport. Are you looking around for a passport? On the
Yeah,
table?
my passport is on the table right now.
All right, we're gonna pause right here, and Darcy's gonna look at her passport.
And we're back. I have flipped to the important information regarding your passport page in my actual passport. And I've read through what all this says. And under the alteration or mutilation of your passport paragraph, it says, quote, only authorized officials of the United States or foreign countries may place stamps or make notations or additions in this passport, end quote.
Interestingly enough, so I want to also rescind what I said about anybody can just doodle in your passport or stamp in your passport. I found an article from Business Insider where a woman was refused entry on a plane because she had a souvenir stamp from Machu Picchu. And apparently, like, there's travel, like, apparently it's a thing. So there's like Machu Picchu has one. There's a town in Wales with a very long name that I will not try to pronounce. Antarctica, Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin. As I mentioned with Mount Fuji, there's like all these like certain locations have little passport stamps because they're like, since we're doing away with passport stamps in general, why not make it like when you went to a location, you get stamped just as a fun little thing. But basically they're like, that does not adhere to, I think it's like rule 5 of your passport. And because it's not official, you can be rejected entry on a plane to a country, and there's no way around it, like except getting a new passport, because it's considered no longer a valid document.
So get a stamp book, just a little extra book where you can get these stamps.
I think
not in your
book,
official
or
passport.
like I have an old passport, like that I still have to. I think I have to travel with it only when I'm going to China because it's like you can't. Like,
because it has your visa in it, but it's not your current passport, but exactly. It has your current visa. Yeah.
But it's like that could be fun. Like you fill up your old passport book with passports, and I say that too because it's like when I first went traveling, the United States offers, do you want this thin passport book or the thick one? And I'm like, I'm traveling the world. I want the thick one. And I'm like, I have 4 passport stamps in there because I went all through Europe, 1 stamp, and then I went to Tunisia and then like China, and that was it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I want more stamps in here. So I think, everything we just said about get your passport stamped. No, rescind that. It's terrible advice. Do not mutilate your passport. I immediately regret that, but I'm leaving it in here to show that mistakes.
We learned something today.
Yeah, we did. You should fix your mistakes, honor your mistakes. Something about mistakes. Mistakes
and
aren't
be okay
bad.
with always learning.
There we go.
It's okay to make mistakes.
So is there anything else about EES we should know?
Yeah. Speaking of borders and things, I just want to make sure that we're all clear. The EES has to do with EU borders. So this is not like going to be a little turnstile you have to go through going from Italy to France. It is just within, maritime, air, and, train borders and things like that.
It was the EU, but also Iceland, Liechtenstein, Switzerland.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that note. Yes. It is EU countries plus Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's basically EU plus the few other Schengen zone countries that aren't in the EU. Okay. There's no sneaking into Iceland, basically, and then trying to come over. Makes sense. Cool. And is there any other information or about EES that we should know?
I think that's all I have for
Perfect.
now. If there's any, when all of this is rolled out, we'll keep you guys updated if we get new information as best we can. But I think that's basically what you need to know.
And on that note, if you do want to stay updated, we do have a newsletter on our website, onlybag.com. It's probably where we'll put stuff like this if it's too small to put into an episode, because it's like sometimes we get all these, like, for instance, one piece of information I wanted to put in this episode is that you'll no longer have to validate your regional train ticket in Italy starting like September 24th of this year, 2024, or September 21st of 2024. But it's such a small piece of information that I'm like, well, it only really goes in a newsletter. It doesn't really belong anywhere else, unfortunately. But it's just a little fun change, which means that now there will be no tickets you have to validate when taking a train in Italy or bus, because I think some of those are regional bus tickets as well. But that brings us to our next, very briefly, point, if I may, to kind of tie things up, is the tourist tax. And the reason I wanted to mention this is because undoubtedly, if you've ever looked at an article about Italy in the last 3 or 4 weeks, you've probably seen an article saying Italy's introducing a €25 a night tourist tax. There is some truth to that, so I wanted to just go ahead and briefly tackle it. So starting from the top, Italy, a lot of Italy's cities, Italian cities, I should say, and some Italian small towns. Basically, it's done by cities and then places of cultural heritage. So that includes Amalfi Coast, Cinque Terre, Siena. Technically, is actually quite even though it's quite popular in American sort of when we think of Italy, we're like, oh, Siena, it must be huge. I'm like, no, Siena is tiny in comparison. But they also have a tourist tax when a city of a similar size might not, because nobody would go to that similar size city. I think there's something like 30 or 40 cities and municipalities and cultural heritage areas that basically charge a tourist tax to spend the night. And if I'm not mistaken, it's not, because you and I were actually really worried when we were staying in North Macedonia. Has a similar thing. I think it's like €2.50 a night per person, but it's only for the first 7 nights. If you're there for longer than 7 nights, then you don't have to pay it anymore. Because we were thinking, oh my God, that's like, we're staying there for 30 days. It's a lot of money we're paying on top of Airbnb. But no, it was just for the first 7 days. I think Italy has something similar. It's not every night. It's just for the first, I think 7 days or 10 days of your stay. And then if you're staying, I should say 7 or 10 days of your stay in the same place. I don't think.
Yes, if you move hotels like within the same city.
I think you still have to pay the tourist tax, unfortunately. But if you're like a digital nomad and you're like, I want a long-term Airbnb in Rome kind of thing, you only have to pay for the first, I think 7 or 10 days, and then you're fine. But you will have seen articles probably about Italy introducing higher rates. It is something that's being discussed, especially because, and we're going to do this episode on this, I think maybe next episode or episode later, on the Rome Jubilee, what to expect, what's going on, and why you can't see anything in Rome right now.
Because it's covered in scaffolding.
But that is essentially in preparation for this, they're trying to get these sort of systems into place, and which is why I'm so curious about the EES system thing, because if it malfunctions, Rome's expecting like 32 million people next year.
I'm so glad they're rolling out like all of this brand new stuff all at the same time when a giant influx of people is gonna, change.
And to be fair, it's only going to descend on one city more or less, but it's still it's fascinating, like, to me, that like, oh, that's an interesting time to do it. Basically the right now, without getting too much into depth, it's just like Rome, I think it's €6 a night for any hotel between 100 and 400 euros, and then it's €7, €8, €9, and then I think that's like, it goes up to €10 a night if you're staying at a hotel that's, I think, more than like 1,000 or 1,500 euros a night. But it's going to change to essentially, the lower end is not going to change very much. I think it's, if your hotel's less than 100 euros, it's going to be €5 a night. But if it's 100 and 400 euros, it's going to be €10 a night, which is a pretty big leap from 6. Again, if you're staying there for 3 or 4 nights, so it's, especially a family of 4, it's €40 every night for the 4 nights you're there. It's like, oh, that's a lot of money we're all of a sudden spending.
And these are quotes for Rome, right? Because it's different for each city.
It's going to be different for each city, but I think it's, well, that's the thing. I think they're trying to homogenize it, because right now it's different for every city, but they are trying to get a little closer to homogenizing it somewhat. Because again, that's the thing. Like, I think like right now Arezzo is a small city in Italy. It's on the list, but like, I think it's like €1 a night or €2 a night. So it's not like, they can't really get away with charging €6 a night, because everyone's like, oh, I just won't go there then.
Right.
And then that €25 a night is for hotel rooms more than €750 a night. So if you're paying €750 a night, I'm willing to bet that €25 extra a night per person is not going to be like a game changer, but it might be, again, if you're a family of 4 and you're renting a €750 hotel room for the night, that's an extra €100 a night for a family of 4. So it is, it is
that's
money.
That's a good point.
It's a dinner out, basically. So I wanted to mention, though, that in tandem with the fact that one of the big changes that they're introducing, and something we briefly talked about off mic, is that right now, like I said, only about 30 or 40 municipalities and cultural centers have the ability to charge a tourist tax. Even if a town wants to charge a tourist tax, like Spoleto, for instance, is a really small town in Umbria. It's really beautiful. It's like every time you see a picture of a small like alleyway with what are those little, not gardenias, not rhododendrons, but geraniums.
Geraniums.
There we go, y'all. I found it. Little alleyway with geraniums is almost always going to be like Spoleto or something like that. Spello, I think is actually what it's called, Spell. Okay. Spoleto is the art festival.
Yeah.
Art, and that one, I don't think they have I don't think they're allowed to charge a tourist tax.
That's interesting. That's a major festival every year.
It's a major festival every year. So what this new plan is going to allow every town, every city to charge a tourist tax. And again, this is where I think it's homogenized to a certain extent. It's going to be like, because right now, technically, I think Rome has a cheaper tourist tax than Venice. Yes. Or excuse me, than Florence. I think Rome's is 6 a night, where Venice is 7 a night, kind of thing. So in theory, if you want to do a day trip in Florence from Rome, you could. But more importantly, I think it's only €2 a night right now in Siena, and 7 a night in Florence, and that's a much shorter day trip. That's like a 45-minute trip up there from Siena to Florence. I mean, so in theory, you could save a decent amount of money getting a cheaper hotel or Airbnb in Siena, paying a cheaper tax rate, and then just visiting, doing 2 or 3 day trips to Florence if you want to see the Uffizi or something. So it looks like one of the things they're trying to avoid is like staying outside of Venice. Like right now, again, not to give so many examples, but staying in Mestre is the way to go right now, because you're in Mestre, you're like a 2-minute bus ride from Venice, and the tourist tax is half the, it's instead of 7, it's like 3, I think. So if you're staying for a week, you do end up saving quite a bit of money just by not being in Venice. And that's one of the ways that they're trying to kind of like, okay, figure out what's the middle ground. But the interesting thing I thought was essentially a lot of small towns that have, like Spoleto has this one little festival, or Pestum has this Greek ruins there in the Cilento. We're going to talk about the Cilento in some upcoming episode. No, there's a lot of these little places that do have their own little bit of culture, I think, that kind of brings people in. And if they're not on the list to basically be allowed to charge tourist tax, they can't. And part of this comes back to they just can't kind of pay themselves back for the extra water waste, the extra food waste, the extra wear and tear on the city, the extra everything. Because it's like, it's either you tax the tourist or you tax all the businesses associated with tourism in order to make that money back. And again, in a place like Rome, in a place like Venice, this gets a little bit weird, because I think Venice took in like 22 million euros this year just from that €5 entry fee. And as we've mentioned in those quick little special episodes, there's no plan on how they're going to use that money. So a lot of people are afraid that it's going to go straight into the pockets of and I don't mean like specifically into their pockets, but like they might pay for some sort of public works project, but then hire their cousin's construction company to do it. So there's a lot of that kind of fear, like, because they didn't put a very specific plan down. And that's right now one of the pushbacks in Italy is a lot of the tourism boards do think it'll hurt tourism, because they're like, if there's no plan on how to use this,
meaning like the entry fee or the tourist tax?
The tourist tax,
okay.
The nightly tourist tax, because if there's no plan on how to use it, but also, like, again, who might go to these small towns if all of a sudden you have to spend, even if it's just €1 a night, like who would go to these small towns to stay there, when you could go to a slightly bigger city and pay slightly more, but you're like, oh, there's a lot more to see. Because right now, the small towns are free once you pay your hotel fee.
Yeah,
or
there's
whatever
no
it is.
additional tax.
There's no additional tax. So I thought that was an interesting thing just to keep in mind for when you are booking your, again, this is supposed to be next year. They're not 100% sure. They haven't really decided yet. But it is something they're considering, is just sort of raising the tourist tax across the board. And as we mentioned in that Venice episode too, Venice, this is the first year they did their €5 entry fee. That is something they're going to look at continuing next year. They've basically
expanding, right?
Expanding, exactly, both potentially price-wise, because they found that, well, $5 wasn't really a deterrent, and everyone's like, okay, so but don't change it, maybe, because like that, at a certain point, you're just milking the, I don't know, the tourists for like for everything. It's just nickel and diming. But they want to expand the dates specifically, and other cities I think have also flirted with the idea of. Like in Italy, I think Bali actually right now charges an entry fee, but I know that Edinburgh, which is in Scotland, obviously is considering charging an entry fee for people who are not staying the night, who are just like on a bus or something like that. And I think that's a big thing even in Italy. Like if you've been to the Vatican area, especially in Rome, well, only in Rome because that's where the Vatican is, but there is just like giant bus after giant bus after giant bus, and a lot of those are like the youth tours or the like I think there's like a youth tour company that you can like go around Italy with youths like of your age. I mean, they're all 20 to 30 and it's mostly drinking, but it, if that's what you're into. But no, there's all these tour groups. Basically, they don't stay in Rome; they stay outside of Rome, where it's cheaper. And so a lot of tour groups are like, well, this actually makes it more expensive for us. This all-inclusive thing, all of a sudden you have to charge X amount more per night. So essentially, what you mentioned when you talked about we'll keep you in the loop. A lot of this seems to be changing. A lot of this seems to be up in the air. A lot of it just seems to be basically in time for the Jubilee. And the very last thing I wanted to mention, as just a fun little primer for our Rome Jubilee episode, is that Rome is considering charging a 1 to 2 euro fee to see the Trevi Fountain.
What?
Yes.
No.
I say that the best part for last, and I didn't tell Darcy about this before
Nope.
the show. For the show.
I disagree with that. They should not do that.
It's actually, so the first time Darcy and I went to Rome ever, the Trevi Fountain was drained, and they had built scaffolding over it that you could walk basically above the water to kind of look at the sculpture. But because they were doing work on it, they were doing restoration work on it, so we didn't actually see it in all of its watery glory. We didn't actually see it for the first time until like 2019, and we first went to Rome in 2015. But no, they're going to start doing that for a variety of reasons. But one, if you've been to the Trevi Fountain, you will know there are at least 2 police officers there at all times, typically shouting at you to not sit or put your hands in the water, or you can sit on the edge, but they don't let you sit on the rocks. It's a weird little like line, because I think when we first went, you could not sit on the edge, and then they just started letting people sit on the edge, and then but like not the rocks. It's a whole thing. They have whistles, they yell. It's really fun. If you like watching people get in trouble, this does not sound like I'm a good person. But no, they're basically, that little piazza is just slammed.
It is.
And it's kind of like there's no self-governing happening. Essentially, it's not a lot of people going, taking a photo and leaving. It's a lot of people hanging out. So it's kind of like, and so it basically creates more and more traffic issues just on foot. Technically I think you can drive through there, but I don't think anybody does, because it's, like,
there's just people. Like, you can't get a car through there.
I think there's one area that you can drive through, but it's almost impossible to do so. So they are considering the only people who would be free would be Romans, could go and see it for free. But everybody else has to pay. Like
there'd be like a turnstile. Like, how do you get?
I think it's something like that. It's some sort of just like, and they wanted to make a fee that was more nominal than an actual like ticket price, because I think they charge 5 euros to see the Pantheon, which is more of a ticket price than like a nominal, I want to help out.
Yeah.
But this is kind of all to say is like the Pantheon, like since last year, now charges 5 euros. It never used to charge money. It is the only church in Rome that actually charges an entry fee, which is wild, because in Siena they have a church, the Duomo charges an entry fee, but the one in Florence, for example, does not. So it's throughout the rest of Europe, it's a little bit weird, like which ones charge entry fees and which ones don't. But it's in Rome, it's always been, every church in Rome was always free, always open, and always available. And the Pantheon, despite the fact that it is also a historic site, was a church for a pretty long period. Technically, it still is. It's under the control of the church, so I think it's technically still is. But it's the only church to charge a fee. So it seems like, just on like part of the reason we want to make this episode, it seems like on the outside, between like the tourist tax, the entry tax, the I'm not going to stay the night tax, I want to see the Spanish Steps, I want to see the Trevi Fountain. It's like, oh, it's €1 here and €1 there, and it kind of feels like the slow, like the death of 1,000 cuts kind of thing. And it feels a little like, oh, before I could just go. And again, I'm comparing this to people in like the 80s who talk about when you went to Rome, there was no gate around the Colosseum. There's no tickets. You just go into the Colosseum. You just walk around the Colosseum. There's no, and again, it's probably better that it's gated and you can't do it now. But it's interesting, like even Pompeii, they're talking about before it was like, or Herculaneum, before it was like a tourist destination. I mean, it was always, but like before it was a recognized and had walls and had a gate. It was just like, you could just spend the day walking around, and that was allowed. And to be fair, I feel like there's parts of Italy you can do that with certain sites. There's not enough money to make it into a tourist site. So that's just all. This was all to kind of say, as again, part of it is just as a little primer for our Rome Jubilee episode. But yeah, Italy is kind of, this kind of goes hand in hand with that sort of episode. Is Italy breaking up with you, or is
she's just setting boundaries?
Yeah,
I don't know. She might be breaking up with you at this point.
Yeah, she might. This might be it for it. But no, this also I think
I'm getting some bad vibes.
Well, I think it also goes hand in hand as the last note is with the what we talked about is Italy's has over tourism issues in like 6 cities. And the thing is, they've been trying to get people to not go to those 6 cities. Like, I mean, Venice, Florence, Siena, Rome, not so much, because while it's really touristy, it's such an established city that there is space naturally, just because it's big. But like Bologna, for instance, is tiny, and when you have 500,000 people in Bologna extra, you really can tell. But you have 500,000 people extra in Rome, it's like, oh, it's kind of a busy day in Rome.
But my problem is that they're doing the the stick, not the carrot. Like
Yes.
they're punishing people financially for coming to incredible places that should be available to visit respectfully. Meaning like if tourists are respectful, but they're not really incentivizing people to visit other places. Obviously, there's like the whole €1 house thing a lot of cities are doing, which
Which we'll talk about in another
we
episode.
will talk about in another
sure.
episode, that incentivizes people in a way with a certain amount of income to live in these places, which is great. Like small towns should be re-inhabited. They're incredible. But to me, they're not incentivizing people to travel and visit other incredible smaller places, or just like odd other places all around Italy. 'Cause there's some beautiful, beautiful places. They're just hurting people. They're hurting tourists and they're hurting locals who are not benefiting from these
Yeah.
fees, because a lot of the places don't actually say where that money is going.
Yes, that's a huge thing. And I think a lot of it too is like you talk about the carrot and the stick, and I think there isn't, and you mentioned the incentives, and I think that's a good point because it's not like it's like the money where their mouth is kind of thing. It's like you're not saying we will cover 20% of your trip here or 40% of your trip here. Not like, I mean, as a tourist, just to kind of get people there. They try they don't really try that many methods.
But even like advertising, like you could
Yeah.
advertise, people just don't know about even Spoleto, which has a giant international, like you said, art festival. A lot of people don't know about it. You might know about it if you're into art, or even if you're in the EU, but I
You
think
actually might know about it if you're in Charleston. Weirdly
yeah,
enough.
because they have like a little sister festival. They
Yeah.
have the Spoleto Art Festival. But I think just putting money into advertising and preparing small towns, like I think ideally there could be a way to prepare smaller cities for an influx of tourists at a certain time of the year, prepare those small businesses that keep that town alive, and advertise to tourists that is available. Make it clear where and when the bus picks up to go to those
Yeah.
places, rather than just charging like all these random fees without explanation as to where that money is going.
And actually interesting, on a very last note, I thought it was fascinating. There was a study in Puglia, Apulia if you're American, but Puglia if you're in Italy, I guess, in 2011. And it was basically asking, because I think 2011 is when the tourist tax was pretty much first instated, like in its current form, the first real big iteration of it. And basically the tourist tax, they were trying to figure out how much people were willing to pay, how much it would hurt tourism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And something they found is that people are more willing to pay if they knew it went for sustainable causes. Specifically, just, again, when I say sustainable, I don't necessarily mean like ecologically sustainable. I just mean sustaining the city. I mean sustaining the town, because I think one of again, we'll talk about the Rome Jubilee, is that more than half the money to renovate the city is actually coming from EU funds, not from tourist taxes,
Tourism.
not from like, so it's not necessarily, I mean, even like there's, these sometimes like some nature reserves off beaches, like the one in Sicily, and it's like they charge you to get in there, and it's the idea of it is that money goes towards paying people to keep it clean and paying people to, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, I think people are willing, like I'm willing to pay money if it means keeping it clean, if it means keeping it preserved for the next person to come. But when you're like, I don't know what you're going to do with the money, and you don't know what you're going to do with the money, and you're just kind of hoping people are going to forget you have this money, is when I think it gets into that kind of a, like, I don't want to help support you just stealing.
Right.
I mean, I don't know, maybe if you do,
I don't want to help the rich get richer. I want to help maintain historically and culturally important places.
Yeah.
And any place. I mean, any place that people are, and like you said, national forests and national lands, like I want my money to go to maintain something, not to like line the pockets of the wealthy.
I love that. We're taking a very hardline stance here on Only Bag. Only Bag, not helping the rich get richer.
Yeah.
But I think that's a fun note to end on. I think it's a great note to end on. No, so I think that's a very brief thing. Again, with these types of things, if you do want to keep up to date with some of it, I mean, there's 1,000 ways to do so. But if you like us and you want us to help you keep up to date, you can sign up for a newsletter. A lot of these things will be kind of coming out in a newsletter as they change. Just little, like, again, monthly little like blips basically in your
It's quick updates. I think we're very I mean, in our podcast, obviously we chit chat a lot, but I think whenever it comes to important small bits of information, like we're not going to add fluff in here. It's just going to be the quick and dirty. Is that a phrase?
Sure.
Quick and clean is what it is.
That's what we're talking about.
Updating you on important info.
Yeah, exactly. What you need to know, and then in the shortest bite-sized thing possible.
Yeah.
So I think that is everything for this episode. We're going to have, again, some interesting episodes coming forward. Rome Jubilee we're talking about visas at some point. We're talking about travel insurance at some point. So yeah, if you like what you're hearing, please follow us, subscribe to us, or I think it's, one of those two.
Follow, subscribe.
Something, yeah. Leave a review. If you think it's 5-star worthy, I also think it's 5-star worthy. If you don't, just let us know why. And I don't know. We'll love it all the same. But yeah, and also if you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you have information that we don't, or if we said something that might be incorrect, please let us know. We'd actually really like to know that, especially if you're from England and you are Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and Northern Ireland, and you do have to get a visa or a different kind of visa to go to Europe now.
I think Ireland wouldn't, because Ireland's
in the EU. Yeah. I just didn't. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so Irish people, never mind. Just go take your $13 billion from Apple and buy something with it. But for the other 4 people,
I don't think that's benefiting the people of Ireland.
It very much is not.
That's more on Darcy's opinions about how we shouldn't be paying.
Well, they didn't even take the money. This has gone so off track.
It really has. So if you have information, if you're from the UK, if you're not from the UK, if you want to correct us on something we said wrong, or if you want to hear about something from us, hopefully we'll get it right. You can contact us at our email, which is onlyabagpodcast@gmail.com. Or you can follow us on Instagram at onlyabagpodcast. You can send us a message there, and you can check out our website, onlyabag.com.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for listening to us ramble for an hour and 10 minutes. I hope you learned some interesting information, and I hope that your fears about these new entry requirements and entry visas and tourist taxes were somewhat allayed, I guess.
Assuaged? Is that the word?
I thought it was fears are allayed. Fears are assuaged.
I don't know. What is English?
I have no idea. We spent all night last night speaking Italian. Not really. We spent all night last night stumbling through Italian. So my English this morning is a little off. But yes, thank you all so much for listening.
Thanks for listening. All right, we'll talk to you next time.